Hello there, and you're very welcome to a special edition of Mullooly Matters. I'm joined here today with both Ciaran and our special guest, MEP from Croatia, Gordan Bosanac. Welcome, Gordan.
Nice to see you.
Thank you very much
for having
welcome,
me.
Ciaran.
Good to see you again.
So you join us here on a very special day. It's the day when the European Commission, Commissioner for Housing, Dan Jorgensen, has released the first ever affordable housing plan for the EU. So we've a lot to digest, and indeed we're coming here off the back of Ciaran's two-day housing event in Galway, which he spoke to many stakeholders, many industry professionals, experts on housing, and indeed local residents to hear their major concerns on housing. Ciaran, if I can just start off the bat, how was Galway? What were your main takeaways from it?
Galway was terrific. In fact, Gordan had to sit back and hear me talk about it in the plenary this afternoon. I filled in the commissioner about what happened because I thought it was kind of typical of many of our cities. 4,000 people on the housing waiting list. But lots of land, lots of property around the city, but lack of investment. In Galway, we identified one particular site called Ardán, which is out beside, many of our listeners will know, the Galway Clinic, state-of-the-art health centre on the outskirts of the city of Galway, really busy centre. A lot of property around it, no houses built because they don't have the water and wastewater facilities. So I asked the commissioner there and then today, will this great new plan, and let's be honest, it's just hot off the press. I looked through it to see where's the money, where's the funding. And I don't know about you, Gordan, but I'm a little underwhelmed about the funding side of the plan. Do you think, is there money really in this new plan from our commissioner?
I mean, there is no explicitly money built in the plan, but I can feel that they are thinking on money. We have already made some decision in this term on cohesion funds that actually the government, if they want, they can now, until the end of the year, remake the money, put money from the cohesion funds which they didn't spend into the housing. So that's one possibility. And it will be hard to imagine that in the next MFF, multi-annual financial framework, there will be no money for housing. We already see now. But what is the catch? It's the catch that it will be up to the government. If the government wants to invest or not. If they don't want to invest, they don't need to. Yes. And that's maybe the problem. So it will be a lot of on the government backs, actually.
Just reading my initial reading of the report, I guess the first word that kind of jumped out at me, and it's the word that Commissioner Jorgensen likes to use a lot, is toolkit for solving this massive crisis here in Europe. How is it as a toolkit?
I mean, because they are afraid, there was a huge debate to what extent actually housing is European EU issue. Because, many are saying, don't touch this, it's a member states. But now we are seeing that there is a space also for European Commission to do something. This is why they are very afraid, and they are using toolkits, recommendations, rules, blah, blah, blah. But also they mentioned legislative act as well. That was surprising.
That was a big
plug.
That was a big plug, Gordan. I mean, I went to hear the Commissioner 3 weeks ago at our committee, sat beside you that evening, and I thought he said he wasn't going to legislate in terms of short-term lettings.
And now they're changing.
And he changed his mind. This is a big surprise zone today.
But it's still not clear because in the latest version, in the leaked version, there was legislation. Now it's written legislative and non-legislative measures. So let us see. But
it's still there. Propose a new legislative initiative on short-term.
Yeah, let us see.
And that's critical, Owen, because in an Irish context or indeed a Croatian context, there is a problem in some touristy areas. I'm sure, having been to Croatian holidays, I'm sure it's the same. When I went to the wedding, I stayed at an Airbnb in your beautiful country. When you go to Galway, you can stay in any amount of Airbnbs.
That's true.
But the problem is the locals and their families sometimes can't get a home themselves and can't buy one. Is that something in your country, Gordan?
Absolutely. It's happening especially in the tourist areas, but now it's even more than the hot tourist areas like Dubrovnik, very famous one. Because, the Europe became really the tourist destination. So it's not only the attractive cities like Barcelona, Dubrovnik, I don't know, even the smaller towns are under this pressure. But let me be clear about the Airbnb, about the short-term rentals in general. I'm not against idea when the middle-class family has an extra property to put in on the rent, because this will increase their budget, and they are not the problem of this crisis. The problems are the big players who are buying 50, 60, 70 flats, and they're occupying them and putting them on the short-term rental. So this is actually what we have to see, how to get rid of this approach of
speculation. And in Croatia at the moment, does there exist any controls on short-term rentals at all?
I mean, there are two ways. Now the government has introduced this method. If you are if you are living in a building, sharing the building with the other tenants, you have to get 2/3 approval of the other tenants to put it on the short-term rentals. And there is another approach in the tourist cities where the local mayors are forced to do a development plan. And they can say to what could be the biggest number of short-term rentals in the city, in the little town, not to exaggerate, not to make too much burden on the communal infrastructure, water, etc. But it's very difficult for local mayors who are not so, they don't have capacity to develop those touristic plans, to develop the plans and then put those measures. So those are two approaches that Croatia is having at the moment. And we are all waiting EU regulation on short-term rentals to be enforced from June, when there should be really exchange of the data between the platforms and the cities.
A major issue that Ciaran mentioned there at the start was the issue of there being lots of land, there not being adequate planning there not being the water, the electricity, these utilities that people do need to survive. You could have as much land as you want, but if you don't have any of these other facilities to actually build a house, then it's impossible to do. Is this also an issue in Croatia?
I mean, building the new properties, this is where we as Greens are a little more cautious, not to say we are not against it. And it is also the problem in Croatia, because actually there is no houses, flats in public ownership. There are a lot of, everything is private. We changed the system in 1990 and it was crazy. I mean, before 1990, it was like 100%, no, it was like 70% public and 30% private. As we change, now it's 99% private, no public housing. And this is why we are thinking that build the new stock. Primary should go that is done by the cities and the state and the region, so that they own the properties. I'm afraid that what we are hearing from our colleagues from MEP group that they are very much into build new, but what if this European money ends up again only in the private investors' hands? Then we will just push for more financialization of the housing market, and then we will not end the crisis. This is so we are in favor. Yes, let's use the new land, but let's use it carefully and let's use it in a way that it stays in the public hands.
Ciaran, how do you respond to that?
Yeah, I think I agree with Gordan on the principle there. A lot of good progress has been made with regard to the building of houses. We had the Bauhaus initiative, we had the strong initiative on renewables, retrofitting. I was part of that. I built my own house in 2005 and for the first time put in my retrofitting, put in my solar, put in my geothermal heat pump. And
is it working?
It's working well. It's working well and has worked very well. But and in Ireland in recent times, people have been moving further away towards that area. The problem has been electricity prices have come back to bite us in some respects. And that's mentioned there's a little bit of this in the report as well from the Commissioner when he talks about trying to bring down the price of running a home as well. That's a factor in Ireland in many cases. Electricity prices are going up and going up and going up. Heat pumps still cost money, even if they run in the middle of the night, which mine does, it still costs money. But one other aspect, and I wonder if Gordan found this today, if I was happy about in the report today, there was a focus on student housing.
Yeah, that's cool.
He's talking about building more student housing, mobilising investments through the InvestEU programme. In an Irish context, that's really important, Owen. In Galway last weekend and in other universities along the west coast, for some reason, these universities have been forbidden from borrowing money.
Yeah.
The technical universities, not the mainstream universities. The mainstream universities in Limerick and Galway could borrow. In fact, Limerick had a bad experience of borrowing. They didn't get value for money. But the technical universities in Donegal and Sligo, Castlebar and in Galway City were prohibited from doing it. So I'm delighted to see this here today.
But how
I presume
could
the Irish
they be
government
prohibited by whom?
Well, this is it. We were told at one stage it was state aid laws. So today we hear this news that state aid laws are going to be changed.
And this is the good news, yes.
Now, there was a bad omen. I don't know if you caught the kind of a lighter moment this afternoon. When the document arrived, we didn't see it till the Commissioner started talking almost. Yeah. And a lot of colleagues were trying to open the attachment on state aid. It wouldn't open. And I said, is this an omen for this afternoon that we're going to talk about state aid again? But many of us are not going to be able to get it. Because it is really about relaxing those laws to allow the state and private property work side by side together, without breaking competition law, but to meet a scale of housing.
Yeah, I mean, the recognition of the student housing is really, really good and important.
What's the student housing situation like in Croatia?
It's also bad, especially in the big cities. And we do have some scattered universities across also little smaller towns and cities. And also the truth is that up to date, you can also use cohesion funds for building the student houses. And Croatia just recently presented the construction of new student dorms across country. But for example, they avoided the town I'm coming, the capital city of Zagreb, which has the biggest need for the student housing. And they avoided, I think, because of the political reasons, because, you know, we are Greens in the government in the city and the EPP is in the government on the national level. So sometimes you have this playing political games with the cohesion funds, and they will to give to their mayors, not to other mayors. And this is what I'm really, really worried. And this is why I'm very loud advocate for direct funding as well of the cities, so that the cities can directly apply for some money to avoid this governmental political manipulation. But
may I ask, what is the rent prices like for these student houses? Because I know in Ireland, certainly, if you do go for student housing, it can be extortionate in price, and it's often more expensive than renting privately.
No.
It's a vicious cycle.
No, here is like, I mean, when you get a place in a student house, you will really pay like low rent, and it's really subsidized by the state. So it's really, you know, you are in the safe hands.
Good model.
But the number of flats in the apartments are too low, and this is why I expect now that, you know, there will be move in this direction as well, and that's the good news.
I think Eoghan also should be positive about one other aspect. I mean, normally we come on here on these podcasts and we kick the Commission and we kick the commissioners and we say this is terrible, but he has been listening to some issues. There's another focus on reskilling and training and apprenticeships today. He's talking about it anyway, supporting it, because that's the big issue, whether it's in Zagreb or it's in Galway City. We don't have the people on the ground to work with the builders, even if we had the money and if we did have the wherewithal. He seems to be suggesting, again, he's looking at various different streamlines of funding. We know already there's 13 million construction workers in Europe. The facts tell us we need 20 million to build the houses we need. So we're going to have to get apprentices. And I've spent a lot of time talking about that at committee. So I'm pleased the Commissioner has put it into it. Now we have to see the follow through. The money has to be provided for the training. Because at the end of the day, if you can have all the money you want for land, but if you haven't got builders, you can't build.
Exactly. But also you have to make this...
Or alternative accommodation, I should say.
Exactly. But those jobs has to be attractive, because now they're really underpaid and their workers are not protected, especially when they move from one member state to work in another member state. I always remember this famous 883 regulation. This is the social security regulation, which was not adopted now for 15 years. There cannot be consensus between the member states. And this regulation does exactly this, to protect you as a worker when you move from one member state to another member state. And especially who is making the most problem are the big construction companies, which doesn't want to recognize all the social benefits that one construction worker who's coming to work from Croatia to Ireland to keep those benefits. So we also have to improve this social security of the construction worker to make those jobs more attractive for younger people, and they can really earn some money and have their families and live from this job.
Is there the danger in upskilling these workers that they're going to get these skills and then move to countries where the pay is better, where they can have a better social life? So we have people perhaps from Eastern Europe moving to Western Europe, people from Ireland moving to Australia, New Zealand. It's not viable to get your skills and stay in Ireland.
Yeah.
You can't. What's the point in staying in Ireland if you can't afford a house?
I'm fully aware of that, because you probably know many of my fellow Croatian citizens, after we entered the EU, ended up in Ireland.
That's right.
So
that's my neighbours.
Yeah, huge Croatian community. And thank you for actually hosting. But we also
they were
now
good neighbours and good workers too, I'll tell you that.
Thank you. But now we are also seeing they start to return. So once when the country recovers and gets economically much better, and when there is saturation of the workers, for example, in your country, they will try to look for another job. But also we have to be honest here. We will still need to look also for the third country nationals to come to work, and this is the reality which we have to face.
Yeah.
And I think I will have to run now, because there is another meeting I'm expecting to attend.
Well, thanks so much for coming and joining us today. And I look forward to our next mission to Dubrovnik and to Zagreb to see the work you're doing with the new housing grant.
I would be happy to host you to the mission.
Thanks a million for joining us today.
Thank you.
Gordan Bosanac, thank you very much.
Oh, and you were there in Galway, I suppose. You saw some of the issues. It did come up in terms of accommodation, in terms of student accommodation.
Yes.
There were a couple of factors that, and I thought that there'd be more focus on doing new builds in the city. But there was an awful lot of focus when we met on Thursday night of doing up derelict properties and trying to renovate properties. Were you surprised by that?
I was surprised at, but at the same time, I do think it is a valid opinion to have. I mean, we heard Gordan talking there about there does seem to be a priority in some factions on build. What would your opinion be on that?
Yeah, I think money is going to be the issue, and you know, I've a bag full of stories, of personal stories from Galway from last weekend, which I've told one or two of them. I mentioned Mary Frayne in the commission today, in the Parliament this afternoon to the Commissioner. I talked about her, separated lady who's been struggling to find a home. She's waiting for Galway City Council at the moment. There's 4,000 of these cases. She's gone through a really difficult time. And I heard more and more of these cases. Young couple, and Anya and Michael, are met on Thursday night in Westside in the community centre. By the way, I should say thanks particularly to the Westside Community Centre, to the management staff, to the Clada Credit Union who came out in force and gave us a great welcome. But that couple came up to me at the end of it and talked about their dream home, which was in Salt Hill, and they went after it. They had a deposit on it, and they discovered an issue with regard to asbestos in the building. And over a course of a period of weeks, that sale fell apart because of the asbestos. Now, you might say that's a separate issue. It was for them, but they turned around and they've got no place near getting a house ever since that. So the dream fell apart.
They were put right back to the back of the line, essentially.
And the price of a house in Galway, as I told the Parliament this afternoon, it's 450,000. It's an average, is the average price. So couples like that are distraught, they're heartbroken, things are out of sight. And that's the hard part about the visit to Galway. And there was a bit of that as well on Friday when we met in Knocknacarrow. Although I think Knocknacarrow, when we met there, it was more strategic look, and I was really happy about the tone of Friday. I think we searched for solutions on Friday to a large degree. But it's tough when you meet somebody who says, you know, I'm not going to get a house. I'm never going to be able to live in my own home. I'll probably be with my parents for the next 20, 30 years.
Well, we're talking about build, of course, is the hot topic in some places. Derelict housing, vacant housing, where the houses are there, it's more than land, the houses are there itself. Are you hoping in this report that this area can be addressed as well? I remember seeing in a committee meeting a few months back, in Italy, for example, there's billions and billions of euros of property sitting there that nobody's using, public property.
Yeah, and I mean, that was one of the good things I think about the work of the committee, our committee. I'm very fortunate to have been a vice chair of the committee. By the way, I should thank Renew and Renew Europe for that, because they nominated me, and of course they're also supporting our podcasts, and they supported our housing convention in Housing Summit in Galway. But those missions were highly effective in that they went around Europe and they spotted those issues in every country. So it's not just Ireland that has derelict buildings, left, right and centre, and there needs to be a wherewithal. There's not that much about it in the Commissioner's finding report today. I don't see any major issues about new funding. But let's be honest, but in Ireland we do have a scheme. We have €50,000 available immediately to a family to restore a derelict house. I think you can get up to 70,000 in certain circumstances. And in Galway, I learned from the City Council that if the building is over a shop, so if it's new property over a shop, you could get it up to even 80 or 90,000, or sorry, more even. I think they talked about 140,000 in a new scheme to restore what's over a shop. Because when you walk through Galway, and particularly down Shop Street, that fabulous part of the city, I love. When you walk down there at night, there's no life. Exactly. You look upstairs, everything is in darkness. And you say to yourself, my God, these are 3-story and 4-story buildings. What a terrible what a terrible loss it is not to be living there.
Yeah, no, I remember it myself from last week. I was just walking down the street after the event, 9-10 o'clock at night, and there was nobody on Shop Street, somewhere that would be bustling during the day. But one statistic that really stuck in my mind from last week was that in Callan, back in Ireland, on the main street, over 70% of the shops on the main street, the properties overhead are vacated.
Yes.
It's shocking, no?
It's a huge issue. It's a huge issue, and I think it was touched on in the conference as well, and in the housing summit we did in Knocknacarrow, when one of our experts said that cities like Galway would be okay and Kilkenny would be okay, and said that the Athlowns and the Monaghan towns, the big ones in my area, my constituency, but the smaller towns would suffer. And that those derelict sites will continue because it's not viable, it's not feasible. Now, that is a worrying issue. Should they get a higher level of aid? One might argue, I bet you there's probably some people watching this who are saying they definitely should get a higher level of aid because you've got to work harder to fill them, probably. I'd look at it a different way. I'd be inclined to increase the grant aid for those properties if they could be let on to people who are first-time buyers. So in other words, if it could be proven that somebody's coming in, that they're not holding on to the house themselves, and somebody's coming in who was on the buyers, who was on the homeless list or was on a housing list, I'd give them €100,000 grant in those circumstances. And I think that might work to get more of those properties renovated.
It seems to me, from reading the report initially, the word toolbox, as I said, is mentioned all the time. There seems to be more talk about European legislation now. Would it be suitable to call it a toolbox at the end of the day? If there is going to be legislation there, it's not going to be stuff that national governments are just going to have to tick a box.
Yeah, I mean, listen, you know, when I hear the language of Europe is something else, something elaborate sometimes, and in many respects, I don't pay that much attention to it. When I came out here last year, I was very impressed initially by the use of the phrase, the right to stay. It features in legislation, it features in various departments and policy and in legislation. But you know, what does it mean? At the end of the day, it's supposed to mean the right to stay, that, you know, a person who was born in an area can live in that area and can actually be entitled to get planning permission, get support for housing. But in reality, I don't see any evidence of legislation or that backs that up in any place. In Galway, in the quite opposite, we heard from my colleague Noel Thomas, the Independent Ireland councillor, who made a really good, strong contribution on Thursday night to the event in Westside, and Noel said the planning has become more and more difficult for people who own land and were trying to get their own children to build on the house. He said it's become nearly impossible in some parts of the county and city to do that. Now we've got to work on that. You know, I said to Commissioner today, we've got to get rid of the red tape. If property is available, if it is serviced for water and wastewater, if there's electricity on site, it seems to me that rezoning it is a no-brainer. It must be done. If it's a crisis in Galway, if we have 4,000 people without a home, as we have in other key towns around the Midlands and the West, we've got to treat it like a crisis. And that means taking a phrase like the right to stay and making it mean something. Taking a phrase like the toolbox, which is mentioned, as you say many times, the different things you need. And you do need a toolbox. You need various aspects. You need the planning, you need the funding, you need the policy.
But from a European
it has to mean
perspective,
something.
will this not just be reduced to a list?
Well,
what can Europe actually do?
That's my
It's all
concern.
well and good you saying removing red tape. If it is left off as a national competency, what's the point of this plan?
But that's my concern, Owen. That's my concern, that sometimes it's tokenism. And they're just throwing in this phraseology. You know, one of our colleagues here in the European Parliament office will confirm this story. John Harkin, who runs the office, and I pursued this issue with the GAA recently of, you know, the right to stay as a GAA club, or the right to continue in operation. And we teased it out. There was a toolbox in terms of what the depopulation and demographics, how the European Commission sees it happening. But we went further. We went to the Commission to try and find somebody down there who was dealing with policy. In other words, what are the policy changes that will allow GAA clubs to hold on to their players in the country? You know what? When we got there, we couldn't find anybody working in that department. We found a commissioner with responsibility for it, but we found no DG with a hands-on role. And to me, you know, we exposed it. Sometimes it is just tokenism, and they really need to do better. I know housing has not been a competency of the European Union Commission previously, but if we are getting into it now, we need to really focus on it.
And finally, coming off the back of your event in Galway, which was held in association with Renew Europe, today we have Commissioner Jorgensen's report on affordable housing. You, as the Vice Chair of the Housing Committee here in the Parliament, and indeed Gordan as the substitute on it, what's your job now? What are you going to do whenever you get back in January to work?
Well, it's like everything else in housing. There's a timeline. So, you know, today we got the Affordable Housing Plan, which is here, this is the document. This is the one that talks about legislating for things like short-term lettings. And by the way I read that working is that they will legislate so that the Irish government can give the power to local authorities in Galway, in Monaghan, in Cavan, in Naas, in Kildare. They decide where there is an area with stressed property issues. And if they see an area, like, say, the Gaeltacht areas of Connemara, because I think that's where it's key in the short-term lettings issue in Galway, it's the local authority that decides, you know what, the locals are stressed out trying to get a house here. We're not allowing any more short-term lettings. Or if we do involve more short-term lettings, it'll be 120 days minimum in terms of doing it. So that's an issue that will now move to the member states. He says in this report he's going to legislate by the second half, third quarter of next year, 2026. So MEPs will have to watch that now. It's our job to ensure what's in this document is delivered on. And similarly, there's 5 or 6 other areas he talks about. We've got to return, and more so we've got to back him up too, because there is a European Parliament housing report coming out, probably at the end of the first quarter, start of the second quarter, and we've got to back up a lot of this stuff with the legislation and with new initiatives. And I'll be there to do that. And you know, having started this project, there's no way we're going to walk away from it until we get more houses and more support.
But Ciaran, crucially, and from an Irish perspective especially, will the local county councillors, will the housing officers in the local authorities be sat down tonight reading this report? The people who do need to be reading this report.
I'd love to say, Eoghan, that it's scintillating reading. It's on their desk. To be positive, I have to say, when we got together at the Renew Europe Summit in Galway, we had a lot of senior county council people there, senior city council people there. I think we had a room full of movers and shakers. And by the way, I should pay tribute to Carol Talon from the iProperty website and platform, who really did a tremendous job as chair of the events for the day. And you know what? They were tuned into European law. They were tuned into changes coming down the line. They were asking me about this. So I think in fairness to local authorities, they will respond, particularly as this document also says more and more county councils should be closer to doing the work. They see it coming back to local authorities as well. Yeah. So in fairness, we have to give it a chance. So we've got the advanced plan. Now we're going to have the European Parliament plan coming in probably in the summer, I'd say. And let's face it, in Ireland, we also have a local housing plan as well. So a lot of plans. Now we want to see less red tape and more houses. Let's start building on. That has to be the message going out from Galway, from our event, and from the Parliament here in Strasbourg this week. We need to start building. If it is an emergency, use emergency legislation and get on with it.
A very interesting discussion coming off the back of last week's Renew housing event over in Galway. Ciaran Mullooly, thank you very much for your insights, and indeed thank you very much to Gordan, who joined us earlier on. Thank you for listening to this very special episode of Mullooly Matters. In the next coming weeks, we'll have more insights from last week's Renew housing event in Galway. We'll be hearing from housing experts, we'll be hearing from people who are affected themselves as well, personal stories about the housing crisis in Ireland. Until then, thank you very much for listening, and make sure to subscribe.